Good morning. Good morning. Yes. Welcome to the beautiful sanctuary at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And thank you for joining us this morning for the Atlanta Mayoral Candidates Forum on Housing, co-hosted by the City for All Coalition, Housing Coalition, and the Transformation Alliance. I'd like to take a minute to with great respect and undying gratitude, I should say, to thank the Atlanta Regional Housing Forum for allowing us to present this candidates forum in the safe space and the safe time that has been reserved for open, honest, balanced dialogue, discussion, planning, and problem solving around housing for over 30 years. So thank you to the Atlanta Regional Housing Forum. My name is William Mcfarlane. I serve as the Relationship Manager for Georgia Advancing Communities Together, or Georgia ACT, and as a proud member of both the City for All Coalition and the Transformation Alliance. Allow me just a couple of seconds to tell you a little bit about the hosting organizations. City for All is a broad-based coalition dedicated to ensuring an Atlanta with housing affordable for all. The coalition works to educate and mobilize citizens to press for legislation and resources which effectively address Atlanta's urgent need for housing affordability and accessibility. The Transformation Alliance is a collaboration of community advocates, policy experts, transit providers, and government agencies that believe equitable, transit-oriented development can promote community-building practices to link communities near transit stations with opportunities that they need to survive. So on behalf of both the City for All and the Transformation Alliance, I'd like to thank the many organizations and individuals, too numerous for me to name, whose hard work and dedication have made this event possible. We are also most appreciative of the candidates, not only for joining us this morning, but for their willingness to complete our housing survey, the summary results of which were made available to you this morning. It has been said that two things are required for significant, impactful change: critical circumstances and hope. Indeed, with no hope to balance those circumstances, what occurs is despair and irrelevance. Well, I think we know that we've achieved critical housing circumstance. What commitments will Atlanta's next leader offer to have us not just hope, but believe that the future Atlanta will be a city for all? So to get us started, and without delay, I am honored to introduce our moderator and the leader of the Atlanta Regional Housing Forum, Mr. Bill Bowling.
Thank you, William. We've never had so many people at a housing forum, so thanks for everybody showing up. It may be the subject today, or it may be that this is actually a very important time, I think, for our city, for those of us who work every day, for folks who may be underhoused. So we'll get on with it. William said there was a long list of folks to thank. I'm going to do a little bit of that right up front. So first, thank all of you for being here. We worked out for the rain to be later. It'll be raining when you leave, but coming in, I appreciate it. Everybody got in here dry. I want to thank St. Luke's Episcopal Church. This is actually where we now do our regional housing forum on the first Wednesday, and we do those quarterly. So this is our housing forum date. We usually do those in the parish hall. So I want to thank the Reverend Dan Matthews, who's the rector here, and the Reverend Lauren Holder, who's head of outreach, that they are hosting us. It's not a small thing to open up the sanctuary versus just the parish hall event. So thank you. We Housing for All, City for All Coalition. Many of you are a part of that, and by the fact that you're here today, we consider you part of that coalition now. That's going to be a permanent coalition that wakes up every day and tries to work in partnership with the new mayor and the leaders of this city to provide better housing choices for our citizens. So for the Transformation Alliance and for the City for All, thank you. They're really the host today. I want to thank some folks who really work behind the scenes. And the first one is Susan Adams, who's here. Susan, who, if anything goes well, give her credit. And George Bergen, who is not here, but is often the person that I'm thanking around the Housing Forum, who really does the legwork to put that together. They're both working at ANDP, so John O'Callahan, thanks for loaning them out to us. I want to thank Bruce Gunner, who's a member of this parish. I hope you like Bruce's artwork on the side. I'm also a member of this parish, so this is really home for us. I want to thank ARC, who is our home for the Regional Housing Forum, and Marissa Ghani, who is the organizer there and kind of holds the flame for us. And I want to thank Partners for Home, who is really focused today on an issue that we're all talking about, is the homeless. A block away is Peachtree Pine, has been a shelter for many years, which are transitioning into other housing choices. This is an emergency in our city. We have folks working on it and having a plan, but when we don't provide housing choices for folks, we end up with folks that are actually homeless on our street. And thanks for all the volunteers who have put this together, folks that worked in the parking lots, greeted you, and did all the things to make this work. I want to also introduce LeBon King. LeBon, if you'll stand up, who is a candidate for mayor. He's not going to be on the panel today, but thank you for stepping up and following your vision to run to be mayor of Atlanta. Thank you, LeBon. Give him a hand. I just want to set the context a little bit. The fact that we're at St. Luke's Church. This is where I started my ministry in 1975. It's a wonder they took me out of fourth grade and gave me a job. But I started here, and I joined a team of volunteers who started the first community kitchen for homeless people, to feed people. And out of that came, 4 or 5 years later, the Atlanta Community Food Bank, which is now serving over 650 congregations all through North Georgia. St. Luke's has been the epicenter for a lot of things, good things that have happened in this city. It's not the first time that we've hosted forums like this. There are many great programs that have grown out of St. Luke's, so it seems right that we would be here. And the other way I would frame this is that I think what we're talking about today really will define our city in the future. That it's a moral question for us as citizens of Atlanta, that we have the leadership, that we have the resources, that we come together and find a common voice to provide housing. And of course, affordable housing does not operate in a vacuum. You'll see from your survey that we ask each of the candidates where housing fit, and they answered that, so I'd encourage you to go to that survey. But there are many other issues that any leader of our city's got to juggle. So we don't expect that housing is the only thing on their mind. But we do expect that our leaders will connect the dots so that housing and transportation choices, housing and jobs and living wages, housing and gentrification and how our neighborhoods develop has got to be central to the city for all, the city we want to create. So thank you all for being here, and we'll get on with the questions. I want to do a little more setting things up. I want to just say that in the city of Atlanta, more than 40,000 households are housing insecure in 2014. 40,000, not people, but households. meaning that these families are either homeless or in low income or paying more than half their income for housing costs. I know at the Atlanta Community Food Bank we're feeding over 200,000 people a week. And over half of those people have a job, keeping their part of the social contract, getting up every day and trying to make ends meet, and are still coming up short. So housing is the number one issue that people who are hungry report to us, that they're paying too much. Only 1 in 10 renter households in Metro Atlanta lives in subsidized rental housing or receives a voucher. Only 1 in 10. So a lot smaller number than people think. Since 2000, the number of housing insecure families in Atlanta has grown by 26%, a quarter of the population here. Families of color are disproportionately impacted. The crisis is only expected to get worse. Without protection, nearly 24,000 subsidized affordable housing units of Atlanta will be lost by 2030. So just standing still, we lose 24,000 subsidized affordable housing units. I want to also acknowledge, because we have a housing forum, many of you attend, that we have invited all the candidates this year to come, and I want to acknowledge that Caesar Mitchell, Mary Norwood, and Kathy Willard have attended the housing forum, and I want to thank you guys for being there, and you've spoke at the housing forum. We expect, and Vincent, has been to the housing forum, so this is an invitation to continue to come. Even when you're mayor, we're going to make a place for you to be there. So, thank you. We asked all of you who registered for this to give us questions, and we had over 100 questions submitted. So we're going to stay here tonight until we get all those 100 done. Oh, we didn't say that, did we? But what we're going to do is we have taken those questions and really kind of collated and found some themes. I'm going to be asking the questions. We're not going to open up the mics. I think it's almost impossible for a candidate to really articulate what they believe and what they're committed to, because we're asking them to do it in 90-second sound bites. That's why the survey that you have in your hands, and one that you can find on the website of City for All, or the Regional Housing Forum at ARC, you will find that full survey there. And that'll probably tell us a lot more than what we're going to cover today. I'll be enforcing a time limit, and we have Emma here, the most important person in the room. Emma, raise your hand so everybody can see her. She's going to keep you on track as well as I will. So I just want to say we're not going to go through formal introductions, and I've asked all the candidates who I know personally if I could use their first names as we're interacting, and they have agreed that we have 5 past or present city council people as candidates. We have 1 state senator. We have 1 Fulton County commissioner who was chairman. We have 1 city agency director of workforce development. And we have a Georgia Tech grad who aspires to be a leader in this city, and we appreciate you being here. So I think the way we will start is please introduce yourself by explaining how your administration will define housing affordability. And Peter, we will start with you. We've set you alphabetical, but we'll be doing variations. So if you'll start, Peter.
Certainly. First, thank you so much for having us here this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. For me, running for mayor, one of the critical motivations was to focus on and help relieve suffering. We have in this city, as was just mentioned in a number of ways, too much suffering and too much unnecessary suffering. It's one of the reasons why I got involved and was the founding board chair for Partners for Home a few years ago, an effort on homelessness that is critical. I define affordable housing all the way down to the lowest levels of income. Often we hear about it as 80% of area median income or 60% of area median income. But the reality is if you make minimum wage or have income below that, neither of those are particularly points that you can get to. So I define housing as making housing available to anybody at any income level. And there's a variety of different tools, probably a dozen to 15 different tools you need to use to make that possible for people at all income levels. And if we don't do that, we're going to have increasing problems with homelessness, housing instability, and other issues. So I'm absolutely committed to it at all levels.
Thank you, Peter. Rohit?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rohit Amanamanchi, and I am a Georgia Tech grad in transportation engineering. And I'm running because I think we need to get serious on moving faster about building transit and housing and parks and schools and everything else that we need to make every neighborhood thriving with opportunities. So I define housing affordability as if you have a full-time job, you should be able to afford the place that you live. And if you become homeless, there should be an opportunity for you to live in a temporary or permanent home and not a homeless shelter and receive the services that you need to get better. So in Atlanta, we're facing this crisis that most of the development that's occurring is luxury development, and even by the housing authority's standards, we're really far behind and we're not on track to get to where we need to take care of our people. So in my administration, we would accelerate the funding available. If we're only spending $40 million, we need to be spending $250 million or more in building the housing and the diverse and various places to be able to provide for this situation right now and for the expected population growth that we're about to experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. Keisha?
Good morning. I am Keisha Lance Bottoms, and thank you for having me this morning. I define housing affordability as the ability to provide housing not just for the least of these, but for all of these. Having housing is a basic human right. And whether or not you are unemployed or homeless, or if you are living on the margins or homeless in plain sight, it is our responsibility as a city, as a caring city, to make sure that we are filling in the gap by working with service providers and also allocating the appropriate funds and making policy decisions that will provide housing for each and every person in this city.
Thank you. Ron?
Former chairman of Fulton County, we are the 9th largest region in the country, and I think that we need to address this issue in 3 ways. Number one, we need to look at it from a 5-county regional perspective, have a shared definition, consistency of practices and policy, because the truth of the matter is we have a lot of migratory patterns across the city from the counties and cities within the counties, et cetera. So there needs to be some sort of regional approach to this issue. Number two, Atlanta is a city of neighborhoods. There are 252 neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. We need to make sure that there's sort of this all boats rising with the tide mentality in terms of making sure that there's consistency in terms of amenities, et cetera, within the city of Atlanta. And then number three, as a former chairman of Fulton County, led the fight in terms of the tax freeze. I think there's a great opportunity in terms of utilizing the tax assessment and the tax collection process as a means of making housing more affordable for people in the city of Atlanta.
Thank you, John.
Good morning. I want to answer your question by telling you a story. 3 Fridays ago, I was at the airport, and I saw a young lady pushing a janitorial cart. She was working for one of the vendors, the contractors that clean up the airport. She was wearing her smock, and I'm running for mayor. So I introduced myself, and she said, I live in a certain neighborhood, a neighborhood that I know very well. And I was going to ask her, but she told me, I make $8.55 an hour. And last week, I couldn't pay my rent. I'm working a double shift this week so I could pay my rent next week. That's what this is about. This is a human issue. And when you ask me what affordability is, affordability for that woman is being able to earn a living wage so she can not only put food in the refrigerator, clothes on the backs of her children, but also to afford a place to live. So my definition of affordability is in the context of economic inequality, economic immobility, as reflected in that woman's story. We've got to make sure that we have housing stock that's affordable to her. That's what this issue is all about. It's the most critical issue we face: economic inequality, immobility, and affordable housing in this city.
Thank you, Vince. Lonza?
Housing affordability. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I'm a little late. Stayed out a little bit longer at the forum. You know, first I think about meeting people exactly where they are. And, you know, I've had the pleasure of serving in the heart of the city and seeing the change that's happened in downtown, midtown, 044, Emmett Park, and Ponce Highland, as well as also having to engage on a regular basis with the largest number of homeless in the heart of the city, Peachtree and Pine, and many who just live under bridges. So we really need housing that meets people exactly there, permanent supportive housing that goes all the way up a range of housing prices, 300, 400, 500. We can fill the gap and the missing middle with tiny houses, with quads, with taking many of the vacant houses and making sure they're affordable, permanently affordable. So there's policies that we need to add to it. There's will. And then when I think about actually the idea of what's possible using the power of a mayor's office, affordability is something that can happen for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you. I'm going to stand because I can't see everybody. Good morning. Three things. First of all, we've got to define what affordability is. Right now in our city, we have some folks who believe affordability is all about making sure housing is available to people who make 0 to 25 to 30% of area median income, and really exclude those who make 100% to 125%. And then you have the vice versa of that. We've got to make sure that we have a unified understanding of what affordability is, and that we as a community all rally around what affordability means. When I'm mayor, we're going to do that. Number two, we're going to make sure we are focused on the groups that really need affordability. They start with our young people and folks who are homeless. Number two, it starts with working poor. Number three, young families that are trying to grow, that have great jobs in this city, and we want them to stay in this city. And number four, our senior population, who really need to be able to age gracefully in place. We're going to approach this three ways when I'm mayor. Number one, we're going to do it through good policy. Number two, we're going to do it through strong partnerships with folks like the Atlanta Housing Authority, the Land Bank Authority, and other nonprofit organizations right here in this city who are committed, like this group, committed to affordability. And then we're going to make sure we're doing it by way of specific initiatives in our city, in our community, like turning blight to light and reclaiming all of the vacant and abandoned houses in our community that need to be turned into affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mary?
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here with you. I have, as Bill said, participated in the Regional Housing Forum because it is so important. Affordability is at every level. We need everyone who wants to live in this city to be able to live in this city, whether that's 30% AMI, 50% AMI, 80% AMI, or the affluent. All incomes, all contribute to our city. All deserve to be here. All deserve to have a good quality of life. We have things that we have to do. In the mid-aughts, we had blight come through the city and ravage neighborhoods with mortgage fraud. Those houses need to be reclaimed and used for affordable housing. We have surplus city property we can use for affordable housing. We need to increase the amount of money that we put together for transit-connected housing, so that we are, when we redo the zoning code, when we redo our city ordinances, we are planning for the future where everyone can live in this city, everyone can be close to work in this city, and everyone can have a good quality of life in this city.
Thank you, Mary. Michael?
Thank you. Michael Sterling, thank you all for being here, and thank you all for hosting this very important conversation about housing affordability. You know, my life started in an orphanage at the Lutheran Social Services Orphanage. So I was a kid whose life started without a home, started without a mother, and started without a father. But I was fortunate to have people in my life who got involved and cared enough to make a difference. So I know what it's like to make sure that people have a place to stay and people are taken care of. When I think about housing affordability, I think about how critical it is to make sure that no matter what income level you are, no matter where you live in our city, that you've got access to affordable housing. So when we talk about inclusionary zoning, for example, I think that the negotiations for my administration started about 60% of AMI. When we talk about affordability, we're having conversations about mitigating tax increases. So, for example, I support a statewide cap on how much property taxes can go up year over year. I support asking the state for a waiver in terms of limiting the rent that can be raised so people don't experience a 40%, 50%, or 100% rent increase year over year. I support opportunities to make sure that folks can stay in neighborhoods and they aren't displaced, that we mitigate the gentrification and displacement of individuals throughout neighborhoods all over the city. So affordability has so many different meanings and requires us to do so many different things the right way. But it starts with making sure that we care and making sure that our intent, that our policy follows our good intentions.
Thank you, Michael. Kathy?
Good morning. I'm Kathy Willard. I think the definition of affordability, of course, is in the context of how much money you have and what your family size is and what your personal circumstance is. I feel like the city of Atlanta and the Atlanta City Council has debated for too many years the pinpoint of what that number is. We need to be thinking about how many units of housing do we need to accommodate people who are homeless, and what sorts of services they need, or if they don't need services but they need to be near a certain school or in a certain neighborhood to reach work, we need to deal with that. For young people just coming out of school, they need that first apartment, and how many of those do we have and what do we need? And then for family size and income, it's a range, but the emergency is with the poorest of the poor in our community. There is a high level of fear and stress going on all across this city for people who know the wave is coming and it's about to break on their head. And we have to get about that. We can't be debating any longer about what, when, how. We have to do it. And then for seniors who have invested in this community, being able to age in place where your support system is around you is of utmost concern. So as we're helping seniors either stay in their homes through tax abatements or through helping them renovate their homes or other kinds of things, we need to make sure that there's a local preference so that they can stay in place as they go. I'm sure we'll be talking about lots of other things, but for me, it's a combination of policy, transportation options, and keeping taxpayer assets, land that we own, in the game to provide what we need now.
Thank you, Kathy. Talking to Keisha before we began, and she said, Bill, we till 10:30 last night at a mayoral forum. So one of the things I want to say is how hard it is to work till 10:30, being on your game for one subject and then coming in the morning and being ready again. So I want to thank you guys. This is a race, and it's hard, so I know it is. The great segue, Kathy, and you're up first on this next question. One of the things that we talk a lot about, and particularly on the west side right now, is around gentrification and how do we preserve the housing that we have. We can't build our way out of this. We're going to have to keep some of the housing. But the great worry as neighborhoods gentrify, and Kwanzaa, you know this very well in the 4th Ward, you've been through that the last 10 years, is how do we let people who have lived there stay there? You've all spoke to it to a certain extent. So you've all demonstrated your concern about gentrification in the survey you completed. Again, I would say, look at that survey. What specific policies will your administration support? We're looking for specific policies to mitigate the impacts of gentrification and to preserve the existing affordable housing that we have. And we're going to start on the back, Kathy, with you.
So as this goes on today, we only have 90 seconds to answer questions that are highly complex. The first thing I want to say is that the housing crisis that we're experiencing here is happening in every city of America, and it is exacerbated by federal and state policies that are creating wider and wider gaps in income inequality and less financing and solutions for housing. I just want to set that as the stage. Secondly, what I want to say is we've got international and local investors that are buying up huge portions of our communities and started back in the foreclosure crisis. They have boarded up homes, they're sitting on them, and they're waiting till their ship comes in to the tune of thousands. When I'm mayor, what I'm going to do is go to the General Assembly and work toward increasing the taxes that those investors are paying on those single-family homes as well as multifamily homes so that you can't board up a 200-unit apartment building, sit on it for 10 years, and pay $2,500 a year in taxes, and we're absorbing the cost of that investment. We're going to equalize that when I'm mayor. Secondly, there's lots of policies. I'm just going to mention two. Second one is we must have a local preference. When we are building housing in a community, we need to build housing for the people who are there who need to be secure. I just want to keep hammering the point that people have to be surrounded, if they choose, by the communities that have supported them over the years, that help them make it through, that organic community that's so important. So local preference is something that doesn't happen much, but we need to know what's happening in a community, what people need, and provide it for them now.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, Kathy and I were in study hall together earlier. And we were talking about the complexity of this issue and the fact that this isn't just an Atlanta problem. We see it in Harlem and Brooklyn and Charlotte, North Carolina, and Miami and Los Angeles and Dallas and Houston. You see it all over the country where communities are being gentrified. It's almost like the reverse of suburban flight, where folks now want to come back into once abandoned urban areas because the new trend is these walkable urban areas. And so we see our communities being gentrified. So when we think about specific policies that I would certainly support, when it comes to, for example, single-family homeowners who have invested in their communities, I think there are, one of the things that happens is people get taxed out of their homes. So the property values rise and people get taxed out of their homes. And I think we've got to potentially support a statewide cap on how much counties and cities can raise property taxes year over year. There are many states and cities that have that cap in place that make sure that people don't get taxed out of their homes. I think we've got to do things like provide rent control measures so that rent on individuals don't get raised 40 and 50% or 100% because a community starts to do well. Midtown's a perfect example. Individuals' rent have risen in some instances 40 to 60%, and they get completely, sent out of the community because they can't afford those exorbitant rent increases. But this is, as Kathy mentioned, this is a highly complex subject, and I would support a number of initiatives. The one thing that we haven't seen is anybody successfully do it around the country. And so we know that there's no silver bullet, but we know we're going to have to do a number of things the right way to make sure we mitigate the gentrification happening in our city.
Thank you, Michael. Mary?
Well, there's several things. Number one, we need to help our seniors stay in their homes by either delaying or freezing their property taxes so that there is not an increase in taxes until that house is sold. Secondly, the code enforcement in Atlanta is completely backwards. We are going after people who are owner-occupants and fining them and hauling them into housing court because of a repair that they can't afford to make, when we really need to be going after the abandoned houses that have come out of mortgage fraud and are in the neighborhood plaguing the community. So I will do a complete redo of the way we go about code enforcement in this city and tackle the bad actors. We also need to go after the landlords who have substandard housing for the renters, which is just unconscionable, and making sure that they are held accountable, whether it's a combination of carrots and sticks with tax abatements and fines. They now are beating the system because it's going through administrative in-rem, and they give the property to their other partner right when the city's code enforcement comes after them. We need to knit these communities back together, and that means building the city out in our commercial corridors, having the neighborhoods be preserved, and the people who are in them protected from having to leave.
Thank you, Mary. And let me just remind you, we're looking for specifics here, not to describe the problem. Thank you, Caesar.
Well, first of all, the problem is complex and it's difficult, but I think it really requires will. First thing that I'm going to do as mayor is to initiate a Blight to Light initiative. And that's going to be partnering with this community, partnering with the business community, and raising the funds necessary to go and take 10,000 vacant and abandoned homes in this city and turn them into homes that are affordable for teachers and firefighters, nurses, and our police officers. That's one initiative. Second thing that we're going to do when I'm mayor is that we're going to focus in on policies, specific policies like inclusionary zoning that require us across the entire city to ensure that a portion of projects that are developed are affordable. The third thing that we're going to do is make sure that city government is a real partner in development projects. I practice law as a real estate lawyer, but I've also been very engaged in producing affordable housing through my civic work, being on the boards of CDCs and other community-based organizations focused on providing affordable housing, but also as a policymaker. In our city, we have the tools through Invest Atlanta and other organizations to ensure that we can create affordable housing through our partnership, through incentives like tax allocation districts. In this city, we have 10. I am the brainchild of 4 of those in South and West Atlanta. We're going to use that in partnership with APS to create more affordable housing through a public-private partnership between the city of Atlanta and the development community. And the last thing I'll say is that AHA has a goal to put online right now, and they're doing it 10,000 affordable units. When I'm mayor, we're going to take that to 20,000 because we're going to be true partners.
Good work. Go on.
Thanks. Good morning again. I've been saying that 20,000 number for a long time, so I won't argue on that one. I definitely agree. First, there are protections for those who are already in neighborhoods. What we saw in the Old Fourth Ward and what we actually implemented was a non-displacement strategy partnered with the Historic District Development Corporation. Many other families that live in Old Fourth Ward and saw the change still live there. So that's one of the things you have to do is make sure you can keep people in neighborhoods. Senior home repair programs, we need to bring that back as a policy. Dollar houses for those who want to go to neighborhoods that have not seen the type of investment that we really should be seeing, especially west of the city. Also, I want to make sure that we add some type of protections on the tax piece for seniors and longtime residents and based on income in some cases for those who own homes. They may not be fully a senior, but they own a home, they inherit it, they lose their property a lot of times. And then lastly, we need to pivot to the investor side and think about all the things that we can do to ensure that investors come in and do what we want them to do in our neighborhoods. And that could be either incentivizing, because we lost that low-income housing tax credit from the state. Really, those dollars go outside of the city. So we need to use Invest Atlanta like we used to use it. It's been used for job creation for the last 10 years or so. We need to go back to housing creation. It's a wonderful tool, set of tools that they have in the toolbox, but we've got to apply them back towards housing and working with the Housing Authority for sure to look at those 11 housing properties that have not been revitalized over the years. Thanks, Chip.
Thank you, Kwanzaa. Vincent, you're up.
The first time that I was invited to come to the Housing Forum was a talk on the issue of predatory lending. In the early 2000s, the banks were, in effect, stealing homes. And the prime victim of that theft were senior citizens. One of the things that we need to do as a policy and as a program is to ensure that senior citizens, fixed income senior citizens, can age in place. Unless we begin to do that, our fight against gentrification is going to be lost. Therefore, what I would propose, and the city used to have a program to renovate the homes of fixed income senior citizens. The best I can tell, that program has disappeared. It's no longer in place at City Hall. What I would do is put that program back in place, make sure that fixed income senior citizens can age in place, get the renovations they need. We know that senior citizens oftentimes get bad loans in order to get their houses fixed, roofs fixed. We're going to make sure that happens. There's some nonprofits in the city, in East Atlanta in particular, that are doing a good job at helping senior citizens get their homes fixed. People have already asked me, some folk have already asked me for it, how are you going to pay for it? And what I would say is this.
Hey, I'm getting to that question.
That if we can find a way to put $850 million in the pockets of 2 sports teams in Atlanta, we can find the money to help senior citizens get their homes fixed.
John?
So in terms of the question about gentrification, the way I look at gentrification is when you have community development and then those who are marginalized are displaced. And I think as I've gone across this city and talked to thousands of residents over the past several weeks dealing with the tax-free situation, I've heard people say that we want our communities to develop. But the complaint has been there are appreciating values in our neighborhood that are having an impact on my home in terms of taxes, whether I live in 4th Ward or whether I live in Buckhead or whether I live in Cascade Heights. So what can we do to minimize the likelihood of people being displaced? I think the most effective thing that we can do, and we can do it on a local level, working with the state, and that is within our toolbox, is to freeze the property assessments at a certain point in time. We can do it for those who have been in our community for many years, and all of a sudden the prices have gone up. You can freeze the property values. You can freeze the property values for seniors and those on fixed income. I think that's the most effective and the most amenable option that we have in our toolbox. Number 2, we don't talk much about evictions from rental properties in Atlanta. We are number 1 in the country. Last year, I went to Red Hook, Brooklyn, part of Brooklyn. They established what's called an eviction court. As chairman of Fulton County, we created many different courts, accountability courts. One of them that we can do in partnership with the city and Fulton County is establish an eviction court, which is a mediation tool to minimize the likelihood of people being evicted from their apartments.
Thank you, John. Keisha?
Thank you. One of the most fulfilling moments I've had on City Council was standing for the announcement of our first displacement-free zone. And the reason it was so fulfilling was for many reasons. One, I called upon the city to examine the concept of creating displacement-free zones to address gentrification. But it was announced in the Vine City English Avenue area. And that is the area that my family, my great-grandparents, children of former slaves, moved into around 1920. And when new apartments came in the 1959 version of gentrification, my family was dispersed. And so it was fulfilling to see that we realized that we have lost beloved communities in this city. And as mayor, I will call upon the city to expand the concept of displacement-free zones and make sure that we model them so they are community-specific. So, for example, in Vine City English Avenue, it may be assistance to help someone pay their rent to stay in their home. In Southwest Atlanta, it may be a senior who can afford to stay in their home, but they cannot afford the repairs or to remediate the mildew in their basement. And so, just as I have done on City Council, I will continue to call upon the city to be creative in concepts that benefit communities across this city.
Thank you, Keisha. Roy?
So specific policies, well, it starts with having a lot more housing stock because...
Speak up so everybody can hear you.
Okay, thanks. When you have a lot more housing stock, the prices of all the other houses aren't as high because there's less demand. So we need to direct the housing authority to build a lot more houses, a lot more diverse houses, and unlike New York and San Francisco, we have the opportunity, we have the land for this, we just need to do it. And then there's the zoning policy, which definitely needs to be redone, but when it is redone, it will take into account what already exists in the neighborhood and give that weight to what needs to be built or what can be built, so that when neighborhoods have been desiring a grocery store or a park, they don't get a luxury condo. And then lastly, that's just for the people who are trying to work and live, but then there's seniors and homeless, and we need to be proactive about helping these people get the resources that they need, whether it's homeless people, they need a place to live, and they might need social services, and whether if it's seniors, we need to go off of an application-based system for renovations and be proactive about approaching all the people who need renovations and can't afford it or can't do it themselves.
Thank you. Peter?
The first thing you need is commitment and targets. So as chief operating officer of the city for several years, I managed all the operating departments on a daily basis. So I know what happens in a city, and I know how issues come up. I know the intensity and the variety of problems you face. So as mayor, I'll have a firm commitment and specific targets around creation of affordable housing and around non-displacement. We can't force the people out of Atlanta that built Atlanta. It's got to be an imperative for the next mayor. So that's the first thing, commitment and targets. Second, we have to have partners in this effort. The city of Atlanta is just one entity. We need to partner with the Atlanta Housing Authority, over which the mayor has a good deal of control through board appointments. But we also need to partner with the nonprofit sector. We need to partner with the corporate sector and with neighborhoods. I have a long track record of working across all of those groups, and we will not get this done without partnership. The Beltline partnership was spun out of a nonprofit that the city partnered with. So we need to partner with everybody in the city. Third, in terms of specifics, there's probably 15 different tools we could talk about all day here. They're complicated, but things like community land trusts, inclusionary zoning, community development corporations, site-specific housing requirements around affordability, all of these are tools that we need to use and can use, but you have to have a mayor that has the commitment and will work with the partners across the city to solve the problem.
Well, I know if I was up there, I would be thinking of something I forgot to say when I had my moment. But I want to key off, Kathy, you started, and almost every one of you spoke to a policy that we're going to need the support or the cooperation of the state, that we don't operate alone. I just want to ask by a show of hands, how many have been to the state capitol, have lobbied for a bill, and been successful and feel like as mayor, you would be effective in trying to get those policies passed for the city of Atlanta? I want to know, have you been to the Capitol and lobbied successfully? All right. So, Rohit, Keisha, you still got that work to do. And do you feel confident as mayor, because it's going to be a big part of the job? Each of you have done this. I'm sorry?
Do you want us to give us an example?
No, I just, we could go on, but I just think this is a very important point. Vincent, you would know this better than anybody because you've been there, that we've got to work in cooperation with the state for many of the things that we're talking about. One of the tools that we've had is homestead exemption. And, you know, prices were going up so much in the property before 2008. We went to the Capitol. We increased the homestead exemption to $30,000 from $15,000. How many of you would support increasing homestead exemption? Several of you spoke to it. All right, so I think we have consensus on that. So let me just, and we're doing great so far, Emma. Everybody's following their timing, so thank you. I want to bore down a little bit on the gentrification and preservation of affordable housing. There's been much attention and concern regarding the shortage of affordable housing units on the Beltline. In fact, this issue has led to the resignation of 2 high-profile board members and the recent leadership change. This has been probably more than anything else been in the media about the lack of affordable housing. How would your administration ensure that the Beltline lives up to its promise to include 5,600 units, which is what they're on tap for? Here I want to ask Caesar first, then Mary, then Kathy, and then Vincent to answer this question.
Well, first of all, my relationship with the Beltline began because of this lady right here, Kathy Willard. One morning, she called me to a meeting very early to introduce this idea to me. And from that point forward, I was really very much committed to making it a reality. As chair of the Community Development Committee, I actually was one of the sponsors of the legislation. I also held hearings and made sure that it became a project that this community, our city, could say grace over, so that it was an inclusive project. When I am mayor, we're going to make sure that we not only produce 5,600 affordable units for the Beltline, but we're going to take that to 10,000, if not more.
How do you do it, Caesar?
We're going to do that because we're going to focus in on partnerships right now. It's been announced that there's a partnership between the Atlanta Housing Authority and the Beltline. We're going to make sure we put that on steroids. Number two, we're going to make sure that we're utilizing the tax increment financing tool that drives the Beltline to ensure that the development community is producing affordability around the Beltline. Number three, the Beltline has a halo area. And in this halo area, we've got homes that are waiting and starving to be redone and redeveloped. We're going to generate a fund that's created from public and private dollars through creative measures from state legislative initiatives that I intend to implement to create homes that are affordable in and around the Beltline area, all the while having strong policy to ensure that we do not have displacement while we're creating this improvement around.
When you say public money, you're talking about the city.
No, I'm talking about public dollars. I'll give you an example. Day one, I'm going to go to the state legislature and ask if we can, and see if we can get past a bill that will allow us to use a portion of intangible tax and transfer tax to create an affordability fund. I'm also going to make sure that, because now we can do incremental sales tax dollars. And we use sales tax dollars for a lot of important measures, such as infrastructure, transportation, et cetera. Why not use a portion of a penny to set aside for a housing trust fund? That's just two of many ideas I have about how we will fund it. I think actually utilizing the funding mechanisms of TIF financing is one way, utilizing the general fund is another way, but that's not always sustainable.
Yeah.
And we've learned that when we experienced the recession.
Thank you. Mary?
Well, there are several things. Number one, we've got the MARTA tax, we've got the T-Splost, and I want to see us take a part of that MARTA tax and have a living transit fund that will be a fund that will provide affordable housing where you're near transit. The other thing that we need to look at is I have been involved in authorizing developments around the Beltline, and we get into the numbers don't work and we can't do this and we can't do that. We need to be very creative in a transfer of development rights, because what we don't want to do with the Beltline is to do such high density development that we literally isolate it from the neighborhoods it's supposed to connect to. So it is very important to me, as we rewrite the zoning ordinance, that we put the policies in place that will enable us to have the livability and the connectivity that we want while building out the Beltline.
Thank you. Kathy?
Thank you. You know, I got back into this race because I was primarily or initially concerned about where I see the Beltline going awry and the missed priorities. That, combined with the issue of income inequality, compelled me to decide to run for office again. I had breakfast with Ryan Gravel this morning. I have breakfast with him every Wednesday morning, and we solve the problems of the world. And it's highly satisfying to both of us. First of all, let me just say this. We've now gone through 2 executive director or CEO changes at the Atlanta Beltline Partnership and at ABI, Atlanta Beltline, Inc., and replaced those positions without a search. We didn't do any analysis about whether we wanted to change our focus, change our direction, bring in talent that had a different point of view about what we're doing, and have a pool that is diverse and reflects our city. That's deeply disappointing to me. I don't know how you think we can get a different result in what the priorities of the organization are when we are recycling the same leadership over and over again. Secondly, the Atlanta Beltline has struggled for the last 15 years to build more than 500 units of affordable housing. What that says to me is, A, we need to think about a different model of how we get that done, i.e., let's take the money that we need to commit to get those units done and give it to organizations and developers who will actually do the job fast, right? This is an organization that's about acquiring a rail corridor, putting down track as quickly as possible, and moving on, not building housing. So I think that's the second piece to that. And thirdly, I think that we have to make sure that we are not giving away land that the Beltline owns or that the city owns so that developers can use their own imagination about how they can make money on it instead of doing what we need to do in the communities where we need to be doing this work.
Thank you, Kathy. Benson?
12 years ago, I attended one of those 90 meetings about the Beltline. And at that meeting, I got up and I said that the Beltline we have a danger of the Beltline becoming an engine for gentrification. And I almost got ran out of the meeting because I was goring a sacred cow. But guess what's happened? It has indeed become that engine for gentrification. And I know people have epiphanies, but we cannot govern by epiphany. We've got to do the right thing when it's time to do the right thing. Over the last 12 years, when I've been fighting the banks, when I've been fighting the Wall Street, when I've been fighting to keep people in their homes, City Hall has allowed this to happen. The commitment of the Beltline has been forfeited. So I would, I guess what I'm saying is we need the will. And all these programmatic and technical changes are all fine. But if you have not done the right thing for 12 years, why should we believe you now? So that's why will is the most important thing. I do believe that the function of housing ought to be taken out away from the Beltline and put with another entity that knows how to do housing. Obviously, the Beltline doesn't.
All right, thank you. This is going to be a question for everyone, and I really want to address the issue of homelessness. Because of where we are, because of where Peachtree Pine has been, because of the lack of really appropriate housing for homeless folks at all levels. Really the question is, and we know that there's not enough HUD funding, that it takes more than that. How will you invest in increasing the amount of permanent supportive housing? Everybody know what supportive housing is. How will you invest in increasing the amount of permanent supportive housing for homeless people in Atlanta, including ensuring adequate mental health services for tenants? Okay, so this is a specific kind of housing that I'm talking about. We'll start with you, Kwanzaa. We'll end with you, Peter.
Thank you. Well, I mean, first we have the Housing Opportunity Bond and we have our Homeless Opportunity Bond. I think both of those need to be deployed very strategically towards the empty houses and empty apartments with supportive services that are wrapped around. So if you have a neighborhood that's in disrepair to the west of the city, there are some places where we have properties that could be utilized as 5, 10-person facilities with a caseworker or case manager focused on particular needs, whether it be a family, several families who have certain needs with their children, or whether it be homeless men who need particular services. And we can differentiate these particular locations based on substance abuse or mental illness, but the supportive services have to be aligned. I think there are other partnerships that we should be reaching out to the county. That relationship kind of broke apart over the last few years. It should be brought back together because the county, both of the counties are all our partners in getting things done for the homeless. So thanks.
Thanks. Caesar?
My wife teaches at the highest performing middle school here in Atlanta, here in APS. But she tells me often of how many children that she's teaching that are effectively homeless. When I am mayor, we're going to eliminate homelessness amongst our children. And when we do that, we're going to tackle homelessness with families. And the way that we're going to approach this is through partnerships with the nonprofit community, partnerships with the development community, as Kwanzaa mentioned, that have vacancy rates and apartments that can be used to provide housing for homeless individuals, homeless families, homeless children, so they can focus on learning versus where they're going to sleep from night to night to night. We also are going to take the strategy of housing first. And that's something that's become very important because when you do housing first, you get someone in housing and then you figure out what the issues are that they're confronting that has them homeless in the first place. And that's where the supportive services come in because you can have those services co-located in your housing first strategy. I believe that's extremely important. Eliminating homelessness amongst children, that means we will tackle homelessness amongst families. Eliminating homelessness amongst our veteran population, and when we do that, I believe in partnership with Fulton County, the Atlanta Housing Authority, and the nonprofit community, we can tackle homelessness in a very profound way.
Your answer is it takes partnerships, everybody.
It cannot be done without partnerships.
Okay. Mary? John, I know you want to jump in. You want to go out of order and take your answer?
Yes,
Okay,
certainly,
go ahead.
certainly. So homelessness can be addressed more successfully, effectively, and it can be eradicated with a plan. There are 4,000 homeless people in Atlanta according to the census. Number one, as Caesar pointed out, and Vincent and I have been joking, yeah, we've been talking about this, and now these ideas are being borrowed by many of our colleagues on the stage. But the Home First model is an effective,
we like that
it's an
when we all
effective
get-
model.
Yeah.
I have visited Salt Lake City. I've visited Nashville, Tennessee. I've visited Seattle, Washington, where each of them has that model in place. So you retrofit a facility, multi-units, and then you provide the services to those who are in need of a home and get them on a path to home ownership. So it's an proven model. I've seen it. I've touched and felt and listened and talked to people, number one. Number two, we need to establish what's called assessment centers around the city where a person who is homeless goes to this center, has his or her situation assessed, then pointed to services to be helped. Number three, a high percentage of homeless people are mentally ill. Under my watch at Fulton County, we outsource mental health services, whether Mercy Cares, et cetera, they will be available to work with the homeless community, and the hiring of homeless navigators. These are individuals.
So we got all that, John.
Yes.
How's that going?
It's headed in the right direction, but as mayor, it will happen under my watch.
Okay. Mary, I'm sorry. John was jumping out of his seat over here, so I wanted to get it.
It's all good. I have been following the Regional Commission on Homelessness for a long time. I am very pleased with their coordinated approach, their fact-based approach that they are doing right now. We have reduced the number of unsheltered homeless individuals by 68%. We've reduced the count of homeless individuals in the city by 40%. So we are on the right path. It is different strategies for the different groups, whether it's veterans, youth, families, or the chronic homeless. The other thing that we need to do is to have a full employment program for everyone who can work. This is not to talk about the mental issues. We all understand that, the mental health issues. But I believe, and I have raised private funds to hire individuals to be able to restore their life with dignity. Because what happens is the face of homelessness is not the true face of homelessness. And so we need everyone who can work to be given an opportunity to work, and I commit to a Restoring Dignity to All program to make that happen.
Thank you, Mary. Michael?
Repeat the question for me.
I'm really looking at specifically, as mayor, what you can do to increase the amount of permanent supportive housing. I think we all got a sense of what that is, services surrounding.
I just wanted to make sure I was answering a specific question.
Well, that'd be a first, so go ahead. Yeah.
What I will do, one is, we know, for example, right now the Atlanta Housing Authority has about 1,400 of those units in place. I would work with the Atlanta Housing Authority on their Vision 22 to increase the number of those permanent supportive housing opportunities. The other thing I see that happens a lot, Bill, in Atlanta is that we've got so many people who are working in this space that work in silos. And what I would do is try to coordinate a lot of those service providers in Atlanta who work in this space and see what it is that we can.
You think as mayor you can do that? Because trying to do that.
If I can, I shouldn't be the mayor.
Huh?
If I can, if we can't bring people together.
So are you going to be the convener?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I plan to be the convener.
Okay.
And I've got experience convening people working, at the Workforce Development Agency. I worked with the Atlanta Housing Authority to provide the workforce requirements for their supportive services. I partnered with them on Choice Neighborhood Initiatives, and I had a board of 29 people who were comprised of labor unions, private sector businesses, as well as nonprofit organizations. So I've worked with a number of different organizations and convened people who have very different views in my past. And so I do believe that we can bring people together who are in this space and working to provide affordable, permanent, supportive housing. And the city's got to make an investment. The city also has to maximize the grant dollars it gets from the federal government. The city has to go aggressively after state dollars in this arena. So if we're going to increase the permanent supportive housing that we have for homeless people in the city of Atlanta, it's going to take a multi-tiered approach that requires us convening the number of different groups that are working in this space.
Thank you, Michael. Kathy?
Well, first I'm going to ask John Eves to try to remain as Fulton County Commission Chairman because I think the partnership between the mayor and Fulton County on providing those wraparound services is critical. And I know that there's not a relationship there. I also know that he can't go back and leave now that he's resigned from his seat. But that's unfortunate because that's a missed opportunity for us to work together. The city doesn't provide mental health and substance abuse services. That's a county function. Secondly, what I want to ask is that the people who are on the Atlanta City Council today not approve the sale of the Civic Center site to a private developer. We can do that right this minute until we figure out how many units we need there and how we can provide those services in the same building. And I think there's a lot more we can do there with a not even a very long community conversation about what needs to happen in that very important site that, oh, by the way, is within a relative walkable distance to transportation. It is just what we need. Thirdly, nobody's mentioned partnering with the faith community, and the faith community has been on the leading edge of providing services to people who are homeless with or without coordination from the city or with each other. And I think that's a place where we've got to make sure that those partnerships are heavily at the table. Thirdly, I think we need to make sure that what we do is results oriented. You know, we sat and watched Peachtree Pine for decades, and people didn't get out of it. People didn't get out of homelessness. And we've got to make sure that whatever we're doing is actually working and really not be soft about it. If you don't have a program that's working to get people out of homelessness or help them change their condition, we can't fund you anymore. That's just the way it is. And last, I just don't know if anybody was listening to NPR on the way in when Ben Carson said that they were cutting their budget at HUD by $6 billion. And we've got to find housing for all the people impacted by climate change and funding and flooding while trying to build housing for people who need it now and not in that kind of an emergency situation. So the wave is going to crest, and we've got to stay focused on it.
Did you get that quote? Kathy's in for $6 billion. Peter, you're up.
So I mentioned earlier that a few years ago I helped start an organization as founding board chair called Partners for Home. So I've been walking this walk for a bit. Partners for Home has as its objective coordinating voluntarily, but coordinating nonetheless, the efforts of the service providers in the city of Atlanta. So some of the ideas that have been mentioned we have started doing. So coordinated intake and entry, for example, where we assess individuals and we get them to the best place for those individuals, wherever they hit the system of volunteers in Atlanta and service providers in Atlanta. And yes, that includes the faith community. We look where we have beds available across the city and try and line people up with available beds on a systemic basis. And I just have to give an acknowledgement to our executive director, Catherine Marchman, who's here, who has done incredible work over the last, yes. Helping find Catherine was one of the best things that we did as an organization. But it's not enough. It's not enough. Back to my point about suffering. We have suffering in this city, and I hate to rank suffering and who suffers more than others because that's really not good to do. But when you look at the homeless, when you look at homeless youth that are kicked out of their homes, you are talking about an extreme level of suffering. So we need more money on this. So specifically, I'm supportive of additional funds from the city of Atlanta. We have $25 million in partnership with the private nonprofit sector to deploy on this for a total of $50 million. The next mayor better make darn sure that they spend that money. Some people on stage, I hear, are not interested in spending that money. So we need to make sure that they're locked in on that. And then we need to find more money. We need to get the HUD bonus projects. I've sat in the Continuum of Care meetings, the Continuum of Care Governing Council, trying to figure out how we get more money from HUD through the bonus programs. We need to work on all of those things across the spectrum of funding sources.
Thank you, Peter. Rohit.
Just like Peter said, there's two problems here. One is that we have money allocated to it and we're not spending it. And the other thing is that we need to raise a lot more money for this. And what this is we have 4,000, if we have about 4,000 homeless people, that's enough to give care on a case-by-case basis so that each person's situation can be assessed. Some are mentally ill, some are not. Some have just been evicted because they missed a paycheck. So we could be able to build houses that have the support, and it's been shown in other cities that it costs taxpayers less to actually house homeless people in housing than it is to have them be arrested for crimes or to have them go get mental health services in the hospitals that they can't pay for, and then that eventually goes on the burden of taxpayers. So eventually, it's a pretty sound argument that if we actually provide a house for each homeless person, that would save us money. So we don't need to argue that anymore. We just need to spend the money that we already have allocated for it, and then there are avenues to raise more money, such as the parking tax and bonds that we can use to build these houses that we're so far behind on, and then link these houses to the social services that the people need to actually get back on their feet. Because it's not just the house, but it's the social service as well, and we can't just be like scrounging around looking for a bed for these people. We can be on top of it. If we have 1,400, then why not 4,000?
Thank you, Rohit. Keisha.
Thank you. I think as a city, we have to continue to think in non-traditional ways. There is a very interesting concept that I read about where a senator who is a physician has asked that homelessness be designated as a chronic illness so that prescriptions can be written to address it. And as mayor, I think it's important that we have a director of public health. Although mental illness and addressing mental illness in our city is not under the purview of the city, it certainly impacts the city in any number of ways. But I also think as we leverage non-traditional partnerships, the city needs to serve as a headhunter of sorts. So for example, if a corporation like the Home Depot focuses on veteran services as a part of their core values with their foundation, and we know that there is an organization, be it Families First or any number of nonprofit organizations that have a need, I think it's important that we mirror and partner those organizations together. And as a city, make sure that as people and service providers are coming to us with ideas, that we are pointing them in the right direction and using our bully pulpit to create meaningful partnerships.
Thank you, Keisha. Vincent.
I mean, all of these are excellent proposals. I agree with most of them. I do believe that the housing first model as a concept is critical. What I would do to ensure the supportive services that we're talking about is make sure that that $50 million and other monies, increased monies for housing first type initiatives would have a direct connection to supportive services. A percentage of those dollars would go to supportive services that are needed in order to stabilize people in place. So that the housing first is something that concept is something that I share with some of my friends here on the panel. I agree with them on that.
Well, I'm encouraged you guys are in agreement generally about this. Let me just ask, and this is for the city council people. This is the first time we've ever, and I started on 1975, so we've been working on this a long time. First time we've ever had a general funds, $25 million devoted to supportive housing. As council members, are you guys confident that we're going to get that money and we're going to spend it for the homeless? Kwanzaa?
Absolutely yes, if I'm mayor.
Caesar?
Make sure that the private sector comes in with this 25, and then we've got to multiply on that because it's not going to last forever.
Okay. Mary?
Yes, and we need to make sure that these facilities are built correctly and that they are supervised correctly, because what is one of the problems with supportive housing, and I've been down there watching the debate, is people say, I don't want that in my neighborhood. So it needs to come with security, it needs to be a well-run facility, and
But
needs to have good neighbors.
The operative word is correctly. So who defines correctly?
Everyone knows what being a good neighbor means. Being a good neighbor is not the kind of neighbor that Peachtree Pine has been all these years right next door to St. Luke's. Lots of great intentions there, but it just hasn't been a good neighbor. I think we all understand what that means.
Keisha?
I have not, although I've lobbied at the state and not been successful yet, as mayor, I do look forward to being successful in lobbying the state to allow the city to designate a percentage of sales of property sales over $1 million for certain issues in the city, whether it be increasing our green space or whether it be addressing homelessness in the city.
All right, and let me ask the question, because John, I'm going to call on you for this, so you can answer what you want to, but answer this. What are the lessons learned from Peachtree Pine? John, then Peter, and then Kathy.
Number one, you can't have a big warehouse that just houses folks as an emergency housing shelter. You have to provide services. When a person falls off the wagon, there's got to be a blueprint for that person to get back on the wagon. So unlike the folks up here, I've visited Peachtree and Pines many times, been inside the big facility where they're housed, much like the size of this church. And you see barracks lined up with 300 or 400 men in that facility, but they did not receive any service.
So it's too big and no
service. Too
service.
big, so you need a smaller facility that provides the wraparound services and a roadmap for them to get on their feet again towards some sort of permanent housing. Number two, back to the other question. It's not just the general fund dollars of Atlanta, but it's also the reformation of the Tri-J, the tri-jurisdictional effort that includes DeKalb County, Fulton County, and the city of Atlanta collectively addressing this issue. It was dissolved under the current administration. When you bring them back together, you are able to get HUD dollars, now notwithstanding what Kathy Willard just mentioned, but HUD dollars which allow these three jurisdictions to address the homeless situation in a collaborative way, because homelessness is transient. Here in Atlanta today, maybe in DeKalb County tomorrow, so you got to deal with it in a collaborative way.
So smaller shelters, supportive services,
but also the
being at the
reestablishment of the tri-jurisdictional coalition.
Peter,
So I think there's a couple categories of issues.
lessons learned.
Yeah, lessons learned. So the first one, I think John did a nice job covering. So we have to look at the scale of facilities, we have to look at the amount of services, we have to look at the funding, we have to look at how a organization works in partnership with its neighbors. I think all of those are good issues to look at. But I think that's missing sort of a broader point where we lost our way with Peachtree and Pine over a series of many, many years. We had some very good-intentioned people working very hard to try and solve a problem, and somehow it all came off the rails.
What do you think?
And so, well, I think it's a combination of people and personalities and lack of funding and inability to do what they wanted to do. I mean, it's actually a stew of lots of different things, right? But there's a lesson to be learned there. So as we embark upon, and we need more low-barrier shelters. Part of the plan that we created at Partners for Home is to construct, with that $50 million, new low-barrier shelters so that people can have a place to go, whatever their circumstances. But we need to learn from what happened in Peachtree and Pine and make sure that we're working with all of the stakeholder groups, and we make sure that we provide the best possible environment for the homeless. And I think there's I'd love to see a detailed case study on this from one of the local colleges or universities.
You're in general agreement with Mary.
No, I think that I'm not convinced of Mary's commitment to homelessness, frankly.
Her point.
I get what you're saying about her point. I do think that we need to have organizations that are conscious and work with their neighbors. That, I think, is a good point. I've heard Mary talk about not funding the $50 million and not working on homelessness services. So that's something that I'm concerned about.
I just got her commitment now. Kathy, lessons learned.
Lessons learned. Lessons learned is big, ambiguous programs that aren't measured in terms of results on a pretty regular basis loop out of control very, very quickly. I think the city over the past 20 years failed on multiple occasions to use its influence to put a stop to a program that wasn't working, and including when we found strains of TB in LA that emanated from this building. It is not compassionate to house people in a building where there is active disease happening. So we should have stepped forward and done something about that at that particular point in time. And I think, continuing to be sort of half in the game about homelessness in general in the city, had crept up with us over time, and the combination of that and economic circumstances over the last 10 years had a devastating result.
Thank you. Quickly, Vincent.
Core lesson to be learned from Peachtree Pine, the overarching lesson is that the problem at Peachtree Pine result when a city doesn't take care of its business. I mean, Atlanta is number one, not only in income inequality, but income immobility. That is, the ability of a child to rise out of poverty is only 4% in Atlanta. A child born at Grady Hospital this afternoon has less chance than any place in this country of moving into the middle class. We wouldn't need Peachtree Pine if not for that reality. That's why I think City Hall has lost its way. The fact is that City Hall has been too interested in satisfying millionaires and billionaires and not doing the things necessary to deal with the real problems of economic inequality and income immobility in this city.
Thank you, Vincent. So I want to move now, a couple of things coming up. Where's the money? I'm going to ask that question in a moment. I want to ask about a particular tool that many of you have already referenced, inclusionary zoning. Often controversial, often some folks support it, some folks don't. But I really want to ask, as we have looked at what has happened in high-end housing of the apartments that we're building, there's been an 867% increase of those units. And there's been no increase of affordable units. So you think, well, we're taking care of those folks, but we're not taking the folks on the people we've talked about on limited income who may have particular issues. One of the tools is inclusionary zoning. We have passed that for the Beltline. That was even hard. When we look across the city, I want to ask Keisha, Peter, and then Kwanzaa. Your survey responses reflect that you are not totally committed to inclusionary zoning as a tool. So I'd like for you to clarify that or just really tell me, if not that, what are the tools that we use? You're up.
Interesting you would ask. Last night at our forum, Kathy and I together mulled over an answer because, and this is me putting my lawyer's hat on, legally I'm not sure that we can do inclusionary zoning across the city. Understand that we have the ability to influence.
Well, we're going to send you down to the Capitol to take care of that, right?
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. But it really is just concerns out of the legality of it.
If it was legal, would you support it?
Yes.
Okay.
So you have to be more precise about the term, and that was my issue with the survey.
Okay.
So when you talk, even the term mandatory inclusionary zoning means very different things in different jurisdictions.
What would you support?
So what I would support is a requirement for affordable housing in new construction paired with incentives. And that's actually typically the definition. It's not just a blanket requirement without incentives. I think that you have to have it coupled with incentives, and I'll tell you why. And there's still legal issues with that to be worked out. We are only 8% of the metro population here in the city of Atlanta. We are subject to a metropolitan region which is much larger than us. And if we do something, as for example, I am not in favor of hard rent control. I know Michael talked about that, but I do not think that works. We've looked at other cities, particularly ones that are tiny parts of the jurisdiction. When you put hard rent control in, you end up reducing supply. Developers won't build, and we can't fix that. We can't come up with enough capital as a government to fix that. So things like hard rent control, I think, are ineffective, have been studied and proven to be ineffective, and mandatory inclusionary zoning, if you don't have any incentives, if you're just mandating that if you have a house and you want to rent it out, I'm telling you what you can charge for it, or that you have to build another unit that's affordable, that's, first of all, not legal. Second of all, you'd have to have it done on a statewide basis if it were to be legal. And third, in our particular case, it doesn't work as a jurisdiction.
What tool would you use?
So I would use what I said, which is inclusionary inclusionary zoning, and some people call it mandatory inclusionary zoning, but you link it to specific incentives, tax abatement incentives and other incentives. And there are jurisdictions looking at this. Sandy Springs is looking at a version of this policy. So I believe that we can get in concert with the surrounding jurisdictions, but I don't believe that either legally or practically, just as the city of Atlanta, you can seize sort of 20% of everybody's property rights and force them to do a certain type of construction.
Yes. Well, I've seen rent control work in Boston, in the Northeast, in Cambridge, in the Bronx, so it can work. In our state, I think we still have some challenges with the law, and also the same is true with inclusionary zoning as we know it in terms of a term. I think the real thing is having the will and buying down the land costs and having the right relationships with the banks and the development community. It takes real partnerships to incentivize them to do what you need done. We've had similar types of opportunities on the Boulevard corridor. We've got voluntary affordable coming at the corner of Highland and Boulevard. Also, Wingate Management, which has project-based Section 8, they agreed to do not just low income, but also other types of housing in a place where we could diversify concentrated poverty. So really it's having relationships and also having some tools, again, using Invest Atlanta in a very different way than we've been using it in the last 10 years or so.
Good.
First of all, I believe it really is going to require relationships. Relationships with the banking community, the development community, and the state legislature. As mayor, I'll tap into those relationships I've built through my work civically, in the business community, legal community, and as a policymaker over the last 25 years of my career. But this is the problem. There are about 300 people in this room, and I would dare say that most of you in this room believe in inclusionary zoning. But there's another room where there are about 300 people, and they're going to fight like the Dickens to ensure that we don't have inclusionary zoning. So until we're ready and willing and have the will to step up and say that this is a policy that is going to save our city, we're not going to have inclusionary zoning. We've got to figure out how to make it a win and a win.
So the question, Caesar, and I called on you.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the reality. Are you going to be the leader today?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Because there's no room in this city that I'm going to go in and be a stranger. There's no room in this city I'm going to go in and not be able to have a conversation about the real deal going on, whether it's in the business community or whether it's down at the corner of Boone and Joseph Lowry. That's been my experience. But here's the deal. When you talk about inclusionary zoning, how do you make it the win-win? And some of this has been touched on. People wanting to be consistent, and I respect that with candidates wanting to be consistent, and you should always be consistent with what you say in a room like this and what you say in a room of developers who don't want inclusionary zoning, but this is what it's got to be. We're going to have a policy where it's going to be at least 15 to 20% inclusionary zoning. But we're also going to have policies in place that allow for you, and I'm going to end on this, that will allow for you to be able to get a density bonus, allow for you to have an expedited or reduced permitting process. Those kinds of things create the win-win.
All right, so I know everybody wants to speak on this. We're winding down, and the next question is, where's the money come from? I'm going to give you a chance to stand up and stretch for a minute and think about the answer. You guys have been sitting here for an hour and a half. If you want to stretch for a minute. All right, not too much stretching. All right, so let me bring us back to order. The question is, how do we find dedicated money for affordable housing? Now, I notice Catherine's been mentioned a lot today. Housing Authority will take care of it. I don't know if you've been smiling over here. I hadn't looked over here, Catherine. And you've all made the point that the city can't do this alone. I mean, there's not enough money. Really, I think we're talking about probably $1.5 billion to do everything in our ideal world. But we know that other cities have made commitments greater than ours. So I really want to ask, from your position as mayor, What specific and dedicated sources of revenue would you support? And do you have any creative ideas for new sources of funding? We're going to start with you, Vincent. And John, just be calm. You're next.
The city's going to have to dedicate more of its general fund money. That's number one. Number two, a deeper dive in the philanthropic community. There are other sources of revenue that we're going to have to look at. Some of them have been mentioned. The city's losing out on some revenues that it could be accessing, including some online revenues and other revenues that could be used to meet
What's
this.
online? What do you mean?
Well, the city is losing money and is not collecting sales tax on online purchases and that kind of thing. So we need to, but at the same time, we need to look at, we need to reassess the tax subsidies, tax abatements, tax credits that we're giving. And that reassessment has to happen in January. Are the subsidies that we're giving worth the sacrifice by taxpayers? I think it has to be not just added revenues, but assessing Invest Atlanta has to reorient itself in this issue, and then we need to partner, as already been said, with some of the agencies that are already in place.
Thank you, Vince. John. Okay.
I think that there has been some degree of moderate success when public dollars have been used in terms of financing and either incentivizing or mandating that X number of units be made available that are affordable. You have not only Invest Atlanta, but you also have the Fulton County Development Authority. I think there needs to be alignment and consistency between those two entities. So there's been some moderate success. It's not been completely success. Now, your other question in terms of dollars. There is an existing model in place that we've used it here locally, and it has not been done in a more comprehensive way. That's the purpose-built communities model that occurred in East Lake 10, 15 years ago. $100 million investment completely transformed the community that was once known as Little Vietnam. I submit that we need to have a more comprehensive approach addressing 10 of the worst neighborhoods in Atlanta and making a $1 billion investment. So where does that money come from?
Yeah.
The money comes from existing dollars that are already being used. The City of Atlanta, the Atlanta Housing Authority, the Fulton County Housing Authority, the school system, Fulton County. Right now, each of those entities does something in an independent way and it is not coordinated, it's not a collaboration, it's not a collaborative approach, but utilizing existing resources and attracting private investment. That is a proven model right here in Atlanta.
How much you think we can raise, John?
We can. If you count up the dollars right now, it's close to $1 billion.
Okay.
It's just not being done in a coordinated way.
You and Vincent
So as chairman of Fulton County, I have had the experience of bringing people together, elected officials, the private sector. The mayor has to do that. The vision and the political will and the skill sets and the commitment, it can be done.
Thank you, John. Keisha.
Again, I will ask the state for a dedicated funding source. My husband and I bought an investment property out of state. And in the county that we purchased this property in, 2% had to go towards a fee towards a land bank authority. I think that's a concept that should be explored, if not citywide, in particular areas of the city. That sales over a certain amount, that a percentage of those sales be a designated funding source to address issues in the city, such as homelessness.
And as mayor, would you get our land bank authority working? Ours doesn't work very well.
Yes.
Okay. Rohit?
So like I said, last question, there's two parts of this. The money that we have and we're not spending, and the money that we could have if we started actually spending it. Just now, as you said, we had a $25 million promise to put into housing, and it got matched, and almost it came out to $100 million. So So the money is there, and we can leverage public and private investment to match the money that we can spend. We have money sitting in TADs, and we have money sitting in the general bond that we could be using, but the Peachtree Pine shelter closed, and none of that money got spent on actually putting those people in another place. So the other piece of it is other innovative methods of funding this, and like I said before, there are ways to prove that the amount of money that we're spending as taxpayers could actually be reduced if you provide these services. So we can probably get a bond for this and have that actually work, and then we can see where we're saving money and then have that back the bond.
Thank you, Rohit. Peter.
So let me actually start with a warning. Things are not necessarily perfect when you look at our long-term financial projections as a city. We have a fundamentally broken revenue model and business model as a city. Okay, I've been studying this since 2001. I mentioned before, we have only 8% of the population in the region. We double in the daytime with all the influx of people who commute into Atlanta. We don't have the tax base of the inner ring suburbs like many cities do. And we don't get much money from the state, which is the way other cities solve this problem. So we have a fundamentally challenged fiscal position. That has led to underfunding in parks and arts and culture and public works and a number of other things. We still have a backlog of $750 million in infrastructure in the city. And when I was COO, we didn't have any money for bridges. We had chunks of concrete falling off of bridges, and the solution was to put nets under it to catch the spalling concrete. And when the nets broke, we got bigger nets. So, while things are going well now because of the steps we've taken, we still have this fundamental issue. And then second, we have a recession coming, at least statistically, right? So there are headwinds. Now, I do think there is a moral and practical imperative to invest in this area. So specific sources of revenue include things like a parking tax. We have to work with the state legislature to do that, but that can raise, I've seen estimates up to $40 million a year. When you bond that out, you're actually talking about real money, right? You're talking about $500 million or $800 million, depending on your assumptions. So there are things like parking taxes and others that we need to look at to be a dedicated stream of revenue for this.
Thank you. Kwanzaa.
This is a good idea. Some of the other ideas that others have mentioned are good as well. Back when we were building all the houses under Mayor Bill Campbell, and we had the Atlanta Development Authority strategy in partnership with AHA, Renee Glover was there. There was a formula that was put forth, and it was an innovative model for affordable housing regeneration. Okay, it was public and private. So we've got to do the 2018 to 2020 version of that model. Okay, so it requires using different tools. We've got to talk back to the state to see if we can get pieces of the tax credits that now they send downstate, because that's one layer of funding. If we have the recession, which I'm kind of hoping for, I think it helps us in this city to be able to buy down the land. We can buy down the land costs. Then we have the ability to add another layer of financing to this structure, because that's really the hard thing to do affordable housing all over our city. You've got to be able to have the land. And if the city or one of our entities is able to roll it into the deal, now that makes a deal very affordable and able to offer more affordable units. And then, of course, our other types of layers that we usually use in the city, incentives, and looking even at density bonuses, which we've talked about. I just introduced a piece of legislation yesterday around density bonuses. I mean, we've been doing some of these things, and it's not a silver bullet, and it's not as easy as it looks. But if we take all of these packages and then we shop them to the global funds who want to see affordability, they've heard our story, I think we can get a private partner who'll bring in the tune of $300 to $500 million to help us do billion-dollar type deals.
Okay, and just to be sure that you're quoted correctly, you want to go back to Bill Campbell's model and you're looking for a recession?
Yeah, yes, I am. Yeah.
All right. Caesar?
Well, first of all, I think there are three ways we can do this. I know Senator Fort mentioned the general fund, and I believe that is a viable approach, but it's not a reliable approach. Many years ago, when I was chair of the Community Development Committee, I formed a parks task force. And one of the key things that came out of recommendations that came out of that task force was increasing funding for our parks. We were able to do that to the tune of $2 million for 2 years, and then the recession hit. So I don't think having an annual allocation or being dependent upon an annual allocation from the general fund, I think is a reliable way of creating a long-term affordable housing strategy in our city. But I believe to the extent that we are not going to be in a significant financial crunch to do this, and we have to run the numbers. We could possibly use, number one, social impact bonds. That's the way you actually issue a bond that allows for you to have revenue to achieve certain social purposes alongside certain commercial purposes. The social purpose obviously would be affordable housing. And I mentioned a couple of other things as well. Number one, earlier, I mentioned the fact that we should look at our sales tax levels. We have 3, maybe 4 cents right now. Several years ago, when these taxes were put in place, we didn't have the ability to carve them up into fractional taxes. We can do that now, and I believe we should take one of the pennies we have and carve it up and use a portion of that penny to be a dedicated source for affordable housing. Second thing, I really do believe we can go to the state and ask for a portion of our intangible taxes that we pay for real estate transactions, as well as transfer tax for real estate sales, to make sure that we can use those funds for an affordable housing trust fund. And the last thing, and forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, if we actually use or actually have casino gambling in this city, in this state, the only way I'm going to support it is we're able to take some of the funding that comes from that and help create an affordable housing fund.
How much funding?
I would say not less than $25 million a year to the city of Atlanta, but it should be a fund that can support the entire state in places where these casinos are. Not less than $25 million.
Mary.
I'd like to have a dedicated fund coming out of the MARTA tax, which will be a match. Metro Atlanta Housing Connected Transit Connected Housing. I think that will make a tremendous difference in giving us a dedicated source. I also want to mention one other thing that I have been talking about during my campaign, which is employer-assisted workforce housing. I would like to see subsidies for employees to be able to live closer to where they work, coming from a public-private partnership. So if you are either on MARTA or you are in an apartment that is near the job center where you work, we will have tremendous benefits, and that will be another solution to our affordable housing issue with our workforce.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, so dedicated funding sources for affordable housing. Is that right, Bill?
That's it.
Okay. One, I would support, as I mentioned, the LTF in my survey. I would support the LTF if it's proven to be a legal use of the transportation tax. I would certainly support the LTF. That's one source. You know, when the city had the building and permits in an enterprise fund, it generated almost a $60 million surplus. And so that money is now back into the general fund. And I think that money can certainly be used as an opportunity to provide affordable housing. The Atlanta Housing Authority, through Choice Neighborhoods, took $30 million and leveraged almost $400 million in commitment. I think we can use, even though we've heard today that, HUD's going to lose almost $6 billion or cut its budget by $6 billion. We've got to work with the continuum of care. We've got to work with the Atlanta Housing Authority. We've got to make sure that we're able to leverage any dollars that are available. And respectfully, I've been talking about social impact bonds since we've been doing these forums for about a year, and I was talking about them before then at the Workforce Development Agency. But I certainly think social impact bonds are an innovative way to get public-private partnerships.
How much do you think we can raise there, Michael?
I think somewhere between, depending on what the savings can be at the city level, I think somewhere between $250 to maybe $500 million. $250 million to $500 million.
Okay.
If we get the right investments. And one of the things that I'm going to be announcing later this week is as I roll out my plan for infrastructure, is the creation of an infrastructure bank that will include a broader coalition of what infrastructure means, and that will include affordable housing.
Thank you. Kathy.
Sometimes it's tough to bat cleanup, but sometimes it's easy too. Everybody has said pieces of the puzzle, and I think what we have to think about is, how are we going to fight for ATL? That's why I'm running in this race. Affordability, transportation, and livability, and all those things have to come together simultaneously. It's not one thing or the other. If we don't have schools that don't work, then communities aren't going to work. We're not going to have the tax digest. It's all sort of circular. So we have to do all those things, and then we have to look at our budget, as John said. We've got a reserve budget that keeps getting bigger and bigger, even though our ordinance says our reserve should only be 50 to 20% of our general fund. Well, we're about $50 million sitting in a bank that we could be spending on one-time expenditures that could help spread the budget around, right? I'm pretty conservative financially, but when I see money sitting around when there's immediate need, I have cause for concern about why that's a good policy decision. Parking taxes for commercial parking is the obvious one because businesses can pay for it, out-of-town visitors in particular, but our citizens aren't going to like it very much because the cost of parking is already expensive and we're not used to that. But it's the one thing I think we can get through the General Assembly, and as somebody said, it's probably 30 to 40 million, and we ought to think about that one in particular. But I think that it has to be, how do we make all this work? There's no one neighborhood that needs affordable housing. Buckhead needs affordable housing as much as any other neighborhood does. And so the equation is, how much housing do we need? What kind of housing do we need in a neighborhood? How do we build it? How do we pay for it? And then the last thing is I think our tax digest is completely a mess. As I mentioned earlier, we have investors that are sitting on large parcels and paying virtually nothing. We've just got to roll our sleeves up and sit down and look and say who's paying what, what's fair, and how do we make sure that we are really collecting the revenue we need to collect without continuing to tax people who are already here to death to fund the regional transportation system, to fund the water sewer system that really ultimately many of the other jurisdictions rely on, and all the other things that this small 500,000 people, many of whom are financially strapped, end up paying for. So we've got a big equation to solve.
And I would say, Caesar, you said it very well. We're in one room now, but there's many other rooms. So as the leader, you've got to find win-wins. You've got to find ways to leverage that money. Michael, you referenced the Living Transit Fund, $125 million to try to build some affordability in around MARTA. Who supports that by a raise of hands?
Yeah, if it's legal. If it's legal.
Well, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. So maybe that still has to be decided. It may be why you didn't, Keisha, you did not sign up for that. It was a legal issue for you. Again, it's going to take strong leadership. It's going to take creating win-wins, leveraging money, layering it. But it really comes back to who's willing to spend their political capital to create the city that we want to live in. So I've just got a few more things to finish up. I want to ask, there's 5 of you that are city council members or have been city council members. I'd like to just take that occasion to ask the 5 of you, what has been your greatest success in this area? What have you done while you have been in a leadership position? None of you as mayor, but all of you as city council, 2 of you as the president. What's your greatest accomplishment there?
Yes, shepherding the revitalization of the heart of the city over the last 15 years, downtown, midtown, Old Fourth Ward, Emmett Park, Ponce Highland, at one point Castleberry Hill, Home Park, and Atlantic Station.
And what part did you play, Keisha?
We implemented, tons of programs and initiatives that really were pilots that the rest of the city has adopted. But in particular, the most specific one would be the Year Boulevard. It's the area with the greatest concentration of poverty in the Southeast United States. Average income is $3,000 a year, several hundred families, 3,000 people. You know the place, you know what's going on. But instead of trying to just look at a usual push people out type of strategy, we talked to the developers and we began to regenerate in place. We brought back 87 new senior units. We have another 200, almost 300 underway, all at affordable price points. Plus, we've gotten the private sector, private investors to also buy property
so you
in the
feel like
corridor.
That's a model that you can use?
Yes, we can take that
forward.
around the city because we empower families and children to own their own future.
Okay.
Well, first of all, as a council member and as council president, it's really been about creating strong policy, utilizing the tool we have in Invest Atlanta and other aspects of city government to create tax incentive districts and other economic development initiatives that require affordable housing, and we can do more. But my story around affordable housing is not just being a council member and council president. In my work as a lawyer, I've worked very hard to make sure that we're producing affordable housing, and have produced affordable housing in every community in this city where affordable housing has been needed. I've structured transactions to make sure that that happens. And then thirdly, being available as a community person, as a community leader, being engaged with community development corporations who have the sole purpose and agenda of creating affordable housing for communities. When I'm mayor, we're going to do that and even more.
So your point is that you have been a person to connect the sectors, the programs?
Yes, we've got policy as an elected official. Structuring transactions and making sure we actually deliver units is something I've done as a part of a team as a lawyer. And then thirdly, standing in the gap with organizations that have as their sole purpose generating and creating affordable housing, being there and being a part of the strategy that gets pushed forward to actually deliver those housing units.
Mary.
I was involved in the passage of House Bill 434. You asked if we'd gone over to the state and been and lobbied successfully. That was passed after 2 years. It was passed in March, and it allows us to, for the first time ever, take these abandoned, blighted properties and be able to repurpose them without the city having to hold on to them and be the landlord, the owner of those properties for years and years. That's going to make a huge difference in both revitalizing our communities as well as providing affordable housing for city workers and others who want to come into communities and have an affordable place to live.
So Mary, let me just say, your vision is that you're the leader who can create programs that can connect. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that no one could figure this out. And I delved into the issue, went and talked with the experts, found out what needed to be changed in the state code, got the city to introduce that as part of its legislative package, went to the Capitol, was there when the hearing happened, and was very much in evidence, lobbying behind the scenes to make sure that we got that. That's what I did.
Kathy.
Without a doubt, the Atlanta Beltline. For all of the warts that we're uncovering right this minute in terms of affordability and gentrification, I still believe that growing density around a permanent transportation infrastructure is how this city must grow. It allows us to increase our density, to be able to provide housing close to transit, walking ability to get to transit and reshape how we live in a way that no other project does. It is shovel ready for transportation and as cost effective as we can possibly be. I think the challenge for us is to understand the catalyst it can be and not exploit it for the money that can be made. We definitely want to make money and have people, enjoy the fruits of their labors, but it's also a project that's about how do you build permanent infrastructure? How do you build transportation linked to housing? This is the one project that will affect the city, if we do it right, in a way that will change our lives for the better, I think, for decades to come.
So your point, Kathy, if I'm understanding, is you're connecting the dots. If we do a better job on infrastructure and transportation, that's going to help in the affordable housing area?
I believe so.
Keisha.
My biggest success has been having a seat at the table and using my voice to speak for those who don't have the opportunity to do so for themselves. And I'll give 3 examples. Invest in Southwest Economic Development Initiative in Southwest Atlanta that's brought new restaurants and businesses to the area. Also, the expansion of light rail eventually into Southwest Atlanta to Barge Road. This will connect an entire workforce community to the heart of the city. And thirdly, as executive director of the Recreation Authority, while that was a big job in selling Turner Field, what I was most proud of was using my voice when we were making a grant to Zoo Atlanta, making a condition of that grant that scholarships be provided for children across the city to attend zoo camp. That may seem like a very small thing, but zoo camp is $300 a week. And what we saw is that we had almost 50 children across this city who otherwise would not go into the zoo, spend an entire week at the zoo from Thomasville, Adamsville. And one of the most heartwarming and precious things that I heard at the end of that week was a man came to zoo camp in his uniform. He took off work and said that his 7 and 11-year-old sons had never been to day camp. And had we not provided that scholarship, they would have not had the opportunity to go to camp that summer. And so that's what I'm most proud of, and that's what I consider a success.
Thank you. So I've got one more question, and then we're going to give you a chance to wrap up. And it really comes out of, again, I want to encourage people to go to the surveys. There's a lot more information there. But several of you have been more specific about this, but I want to ask all of you. As mayor, you can't be the expert on everything. Maybe you can't be an expert on anything except leadership and how you get people to follow. I would like to know from you, who do you surround yourself with? What is the structure that you're going to create so that you have a go-to person who's going to get up every day and work on affordable housing? Question clear? All right, hold on. I don't know.
Repeat that again.
Not in any order.
Repeat it one more
back
time.
here.
Repeat that. The question part.
Well, the question really is, you can't be an expert on everything. And housing would be one of those that's the hardest thing to figure out. Very complex, very hard. Takes a lot of political capital to get it done. I'd like to know, what is your structure? Who are you going to surround yourself with? You can even name names if you want to. But I'd be very interested in what your administration looks like, besides you who are committed. You're all committed to it, but somebody's got to get up and do the work every day. We're going to start with you, Peter.
So back to my point about partnerships, you have to look both internally and externally. Internally within City Hall, we need to have more talent and accountability around affordable housing and around housing in general. And frankly, I would extend that to issues of equity and education. So there's a series of new positions, not a lot, but cabinet level positions I would create, one around housing, one around youth development and education, just to name a couple, that would provide the expertise and the point of focus, because it's not just about expertise. To your point, it's having somebody wake up every day knowing that they have a series of concrete objectives, targets, things they'll be measured against, both by the mayor and the community, to get done in these very important areas. Externally, look, we don't have a consolidated community in Atlanta around this issue. We do not have the nonprofit and corporate and development sectors all pulling in the same direction in this. We just don't. We're not there yet. And so one of the things I would do as mayor is be the convener in chief and get everybody in a room and get everybody on the same page with that which they can agree with and lead them to that point.
And who's everybody, Peter?
So it's the nonprofit sector, it's the key developers, both large and small, it's all the neighborhoods in the city, representatives from the key neighborhoods, and yeah, you're going to have a tiered approach. You're going to have big group meetings like this, then you're going to have smaller group meetings, but we have to get people aligned in the city because right now they're not.
Okay. And for the sound people, I'm going to mix it up so that Kathy Willard, who starts with a W, is not the last one again. So you're up, Kathy.
Thanks, Bill. You know, while we've been sitting here, the Atlanta City Design Plan for how we grow into the future is being released sort of publicly. And I think that that's a really interesting model for us to be thinking about. It went through a huge community vetting process. We almost have the roadmap in front of us, if you will. For me, how the cabinet will look is that we'll, in addition to the planning director, we'll have a commissioner of housing whose job it is to set the benchmarks for all those types of housing I mentioned at the first point. A commissioner of transportation, because we've never had one, and pull those functions out of different departments that align with how we get around. And a chief equity officer whose job is to make sure that as we're implementing this vision for how we grow, that we're keeping our commitment to equity and we're not losing ground, but we're making progress along those particular goals. And then it's one plan, one table, and how we align the community and make sure people understand. And then we bring all those other players, faith, philanthropy, the corporate community, anybody who is an advocate or wants to help in any particular area, that we're moving toward a vision. That running the city of Atlanta is not a series of transactions. It is about building something we all know we need. And my job as mayor is to block and tackle, be an advocate, and find funding to leverage in to how we get this done as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you. Rohit?
So there's a problem in the city organization that we're understaffed and underfunded. And so my vision for the city is that I would restructure the way the city is organized at every level, including where there are new cabinet members to like Peter said, to specific issues of housing and equity, and also to have more committees of people that that work together but don't typically collaborate. And so in this new environment, there would be people from all the parts of this issue. It's a really complex issue where the belt line is a really important part of it because it's supposed to be responsible for the housing, but it's not. But then we have some developers like Quest who have shown interest in building affordable housing in upcoming areas. And then there's obviously the people like nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity and Partners for Home that can leverage their community organizing experience to get people to build these houses quicker and cheaper. And then there are other developers that should sit at the table and also Invest Atlanta and the Housing Authority because like I said, there's going to be a lot more building on behalf of the Housing Authority all over the city.
Thank you. Michael.
Well, the city recently brought on a chief equity officer last year. I would maintain that position and make sure that we have somebody whose sole focus is to wake up every day and look at equity and inclusion. That includes affordable housing, that includes income and mobility, that includes income inequality in the city. I would also have somebody designated in the planning department. We've got a chief bicycle officer. We certainly can have someone who is a chief affordable housing officer, someone whose job it is as a part of planning throughout the city, as a part of the city design plan, is to make sure that we've got an affordable housing plan in everything that we do. And that includes making sure that we're connected through the Atlanta Beltline. That includes making sure we're connected through our private development. That includes ensuring that when the city passes the inclusionary zoning ordinance under my administration, that folks are being held accountable for maintaining those affordable housing units. And that includes making sure that we can help find the necessary funds for revitalization.
Who's going to do that, Michael?
I'm not going to name a name because I don't want somebody to become a political target. But there are people who I have in mind who have worked in this space for a very long time, people who may not even know that I'm thinking about them, but people who have worked in this space for a very long time. But I don't want somebody to get a political target on their back because I named them.
Fair enough. Keisha.
I smiled when you asked the question because it made me think of a mug my husband drinks out of every day that says, "I don't need Google. My wife knows everything." So despite what my husband thinks, I know that I don't know everything. But the city has convened a number of commissions and task force in the past, including a cyclorama task force to determine where we would move the cyclorama, an efficiency commission to address issues of efficiency. And I think that a task force charged with addressing affordable housing would also be in order, with the best and the brightest, including our leader of the Housing Authority, Invest Atlanta, but also more importantly from our planning department, but representatives of the communities that are facing this issue, whether it be seniors or whether it be members of our homeless population, and also our stakeholders in our community and nonprofit partners.
Mary?
Well, I have committed to having a community cabinet where I will have representatives from communities throughout the city who are giving me advice on their communities. I will also have advisory councils where there are people who are the subject matter experts, and I will make sure that our housing commissioner is part of the Regional Housing Forum. I've attended on many occasions, and there's not a city representative. You are engaged in this every single day. You need to be working extremely closely with your city government so that we know what you're doing and you know what we're doing.
Thank you. John?
So 2 big things. First of all, you and I did Leadership Atlanta. I love you, commend you for all you've done, but there have been a series of questions that you've asked the city council people that you did not ask the others. So
That's correct.
I just want you to be, I think that was unfair.
Okay.
But number 2, more importantly, I want you to hear me loud and clear. Fulton County was once known as a poster child of dysfunctionality, divisiveness, bickering. We're not a perfect government, but we have come a mighty long way. It's because of the leadership that was provided under my watch in terms of the commissioners in a bipartisan way working together and bringing in, I brought in a top-notch corporate exec who was proven and did a great job in the public and the private sector. He brought in a top-notch team. The city of Atlanta right now is corrupt. City Hall is corrupt. We need to clean house. And going back to Fulton County under my watch last month, we received the top award among 3,200 counties in the country for transparency, accountability, and doing the right thing. It's because tone has been set at the top. As mayor, I will clean shop. I'll bring in a whole new set of players who've been proven and have done the job, whether it's in the public sector or the private sector. We need to change things in City Hall if you're going to get a different result in this city.
Thank you, John. Caesar.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand what the question is.
I'm really asking the question about how you'll structure.
I'm being
okay?
funny. I know what the question is. Day one, I'm going to make you a political target.
Good.
Day one as mayor, I'm going to form an affordable housing task force, and you're going to chair it. But the task force is not going to be about researching and coming up with all the ideas. You all have been working on these ideas forever. This task force is going to be charged with doing two things: moving quickly and coming up with a specific set of recommendations, actionable recommendations within the first 100 days of my term on how we can implement affordable housing, not just for next year, but for a generation to come. Number two, the beauty and the difference of this task force is that it's going to make sure that you have available to you and this task force everyone in city government, everyone around city government, to be your technical assistance in making sure that we bring forth very strong recommendations that we can act on day one. And that's the Atlanta Housing Authority. That's the Land Bank Authority, whose executive director is here right now. That's folks at DCA who can help us out as well in terms of addressing this issue in a collaborative fashion, in a holistic fashion. And last thing, it's not going to stop after 100 days, and my time has expired. But when I'm mayor, the Atlanta Housing Authority director is going to sit on cabinet, and we're going to make sure we have a strong strategy. Land Bank Authority is going to be invited to cabinet to make sure we stay focused on this issue. It will not be unknown to ask the head of DCA for the state of Georgia to come to cabinet so that we can address these issues in a real present time fashion every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Benson.
I really want to know your question. You wanted to know who have we surrounded ourselves with and who we will.
I really want to know how you're going to lead. And, you know, being that you can't be an expert on everything, we've got...
Well, I have, in the last 20 years, I have depended on a full array of folk. I've fair housing activists and housing lawyers, people, community leaders. I saw Columbus Ward here, who's an essential leader in this community, neighborhood activists. So I've surrounded myself with a full array of housing advocates on these issues of affordability, fair housing, that kind of thing. Well, one thing I do want to say is I want to make mention of the Department of Housing. The Department of Housing in the city of Atlanta over the last several years has been marginalized. It has been deprioritized as a vehicle to work on housing issues and affordable housing. When I'm mayor, the Department of Housing is going to be revitalized. It's going to get back some of its responsibilities that have gone to other places. That's absolutely critical. I will tell you, there was a lawsuit several years ago by a fair housing organization, sued the big banks, got a settlement, millions of dollars for affordable housing. DeKalb County used those affordable housing dollars. Guess what happened at the city of Atlanta? They couldn't get a call back, and the bank asked for their money back. So leadership means having the will. This was found money at the doorstep. And since this is the first time I've gone over my time, I'm going to persist. There are other people who have been more liberal with their time. But I just think it's important that people know that when there are opportunities, they have to be taken advantage of. A Department of Housing whose mission is to do that will be very important in my administration.
Thank you. Who hadn't spoken? Did you start?
I haven't.
You're up.
Well, I like to get things done. And, I don't really have a lot of time for talking. So I've always surrounded myself with really smart people. People like Dr. Jay Tribby, and he's a member of this church. And, and others who are thought leaders. Many of you are in this room. I've called and asked for your support, your advice, your counsel on how we could do innovative things in Council District 2. I do the same thing as mayor. First and foremost, when I think about people who have actually done affordable housing, I would call on them Tamanika Youngblood. People like Janice Ware, Egbert Perry, Noel Khalil. They've actually delivered units, whether it be single family, multifamily, adaptive reuse, historic preservation, and large-scale affordable housing. Of course, the cabinet and all the stakeholders that touch the city directly would be in the room. The business community, former mayors, all of them I have a relationship with. I don't have any problems with any one of them. I think it's necessary that we reunify our city. And it starts in this conversation. So those are the types of people I'll have in the room. I'll open an office of neighborhoods, nonprofits, and faith that'll bring a lot of people together and connect the dots in a way that we haven't really seen things connected. And, you know, just thinking about the people in this room, you've cared, you've been passionate, you've come down, you've spoken to us over the years, but you really haven't seen the action that you know our city deserves. But a lot of times we also throw a lot of good money after bad when we try to do good, but it gets kind of messed up with some kind of other strategies or the forces of compromise in our city, because oftentimes the big business groups that are not in this room right now, they can manipulate the process and are able to stop us from actually doing the good and the goodwill that our city deserves.
Thank you. This may not have been fair, but that's on me. This is a really hard thing to do. And you guys have done, I asked Mary this morning, how many of you have done? You said 25 or 30 of these. I can't imagine sitting in front of people for 2 hours trying to set up straight. I would have fallen asleep by now if I'd been up till 10:30. So I want to thank you up front for your patience, for your focus on this, for the answers that you've provided. And I really want to give you an opportunity right now to wrap it up, to tell me and tell us and to tell the city why you're the leader that we need. I just want to go back. I picked up a quote last night by former Mayor Shirley Franklin. And she said, "The most important legacy is earning and maintaining the public's trust, being a consensus builder and maintaining it." And I think you've all spoken to that in different ways today with your ideas. So I want to, for all of us, thank you and give you an opportunity to tell us why you're the mayor that we need for the city going forward. I'm going to change up the order for the sound people a little bit, since A's over here always started and W's ended. So I'm going to start with you, Rohit. Tell me why you're the mayor that we need.
Well, first I want to start with that I have fresh ideas to shake up the city and actually start getting things done. I see that there are council members running for mayor, and there's a reputation in City Hall that there is it's untrustworthy and not taking action. But under my leadership, we would leverage the resources and the money that we have to actually start taking action. I would develop policy that has actionable items and get people together that, like I said, work together but don't actually convene to get ideas bouncing around and collaboration like we've never actually had before. So when I'm mayor, it'll be pretty much everything that we've developed ideas. Neighborhoods, they've gotten together. We've already expressed what we want and need, but these things actually have to start happening. We needed the funding, and we have that. We finally just need the political will to make these things happen. And so when I'm mayor, these things will happen.
Thank you, Rohit. I want you to give Rohit a hand. And I just want to acknowledge that Rohit's the only millennial running. So for the millennials out here, take note. Step up. Rohit, stay with it. Maybe you'll be mayor one day. Keisha?
Thank you. Atlanta is a tale of two cities, and I am the only candidate for mayor who has lived and worked in both those places. As an attorney, I argued before the Georgia Supreme Court, challenging one of the most well-known domestic attorneys in the state. And I won that case, changing the way child support payments can be made to women across the state. So I have the intelligence, I have the fortitude, I have the wisdom to be mayor. As a city council member, I have fought fearlessly for Southwest Atlanta. I mentioned Invest in Southwest and other initiatives that have come to the area over the last 8 years. But also, as a child of a single mother, I watched my father go to prison when I was 8 years old. And while that was one of the most traumatic things that I've ever experienced in my life, I now know on the other side of it, it is the reason that I have a heart and compassion for the community, because I know what it is like to watch a mother struggle to keep the lights on, to keep the water on, and to keep food on the table. You have to have a mayor who understands this city, who can sit down in a boardroom in Buckhead in the very same way that you can sit at a table on Bankhead. I am the only candidate who has lived it, who knows it, and I don't live it in the abstract. I don't talk about it in the abstract, and I don't think about solutions in the abstract. That is the reason I am the best qualified person to be mayor of Atlanta.
Thank you, Keisha. Please give her a hand. Thank you. John?
Thank you, Bill. It's about leadership. Past results are the greatest indication of future success. I became chairman of Fulton County back in 2007, and when I inherited the helm of leadership, it was a divided county along racial, partisan, and geographical lines. The northern part of our county wanted to split off and be Milton County. But because of my collaborative style of leadership, my willingness to take a stand, my desire to find the common denominator, we brought our county together. We're now a unified county and cohesive as a result of my leadership. Delivered some great things during my 10 years. We saved Grady Hospital, which was going to close in 2008. We did the most sweeping criminal justice reform in the history of Fulton County and the state of Georgia under my watch. I established expungement summits that provided opportunities for people who had an arrest record to have housing as well as to keep their jobs. We delivered a $655 million transportation SPLOS. We also froze the property values or assessments of people throughout the county, 317,000 parcels. And lastly, as I mentioned earlier, did all of this in getting national recognition for accountability and transparency and ethics. And so I'm very proud about my leadership as chairman of Fulton County. The Atlanta that we know today is changing. It's changing right in front of our eyes. The rhetoric that you've heard tonight, this morning, does not necessarily match up to the reality. You need fresh ideas, a fresh perspective, and a fresh point of view in terms of being the mayor of the city of Atlanta. My friends, I submit to you that I have the experience, the leadership, the temperament, and the know-withal to make it happen as the mayor of the city of Atlanta. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Please give him a hand. Vincent Ford.
Over the last 20 years, while I was in the legislature, and 20 years before that, I have had a record on these issues. I worked with Roy Barnes in the early 2000s to pass the strongest anti-predatory lending law in the country. I'm very proud of that. Worked with the state to get funds in the city of Atlanta, home safe funds in the city of Atlanta to help homeowners that were underwater. I mean, that's the record. When other people were looking the other way, avoiding these issues until recently, the last few months, I've been out on the front line on neighborhood revitalization, neighborhood protection, and fighting subprime lending that has destabilized their neighborhoods and made them susceptible to the foreclosure and eviction crisis that we're experiencing now. That's my record. It's been a sustained record over 20 years. I compare it to anyone's. That's why I ought to be the next mayor of the city of Atlanta, because I have a consistent record, unimpeachable record on these issues of affordable housing. And that's why I want to be your mayor. I want to use that experience to make sure that this city works for everybody. That City Hall doesn't just work for millionaires and billionaires, but works for everybody.
Please give Vincent Ford. Thank you for your leadership, Vincent. Kwanzaa.
Thank you. I've said this before. Atlanta doesn't need a white mayor, a black mayor, a gay mayor, or a straight mayor. Atlanta needs a great mayor, a mayor who'll put people and neighborhoods first, a mayor who'll put affordable housing at the core of getting things done. I'm Kwanzaa Hall, and I'll be everybody's mayor. And also, just to end, everyone on this stage could be a part of my team as mayor, for sure.
Thank you. See, he can delegate too, Caesar. So
I love that. Well, first of all, thank you all for being here and giving us an opportunity to share in a real conversation about the future of our city. I want to be your mayor, and I believe I can be a great mayor for this city because, number one, I love this city. This is a city that literally birthed me and raised me. I have parents who've been civil servants. My mother was a school teacher here in APS. My father was an Atlanta police officer, and although he passed away when I was very young, I learned from both of them the value of service. There's no one on the stage that has more invested in this city and her success and her people than I do. And I've demonstrated that every day, not just in elected office, but in my work before elected office. And while being in elected office, there's no one on this stage that understands this city in a 360-degree fashion and the way that I do. So my leadership will not have blind spots. I understand what it is to create policy. I understand what it is to lead organizations. I understand what it means to create solutions as a lawyer, and I understand what it means to be a small business owner and the struggles that come along with that. I understand what it means to live and serve on the community level. That level of understanding our city in a holistic fashion is the kind of mayor that I believe our city deserves, and that's the kind of mayor that I'm going to be. I'm going to bring leadership. I'm going to bring service. I'm going to bring experience. But most important, I'm going to bring passion and a love for her city, our city, her people, all of you. And we're going to move this city together, and we're not going to leave anyone behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Caesar. Please give Caesar a hand.
As a former corporate executive and a business owner and the leader of numerous nonprofits, I have had experience in the business community and the nonprofit community, and I have served the city both as a community advocate and as an elected official for over 25 years. I bring a unique understanding of the city more than anyone else. I have been representing the city for many years citywide. I know every part of it. I am connected to every part of it. I have fought to protect communities. I have fought to preserve neighborhoods. I have fought to enhance the quality of life for all of our citizens everywhere. I get deep into the weeds because it's important. You need a CEO that will run this city well. You need people to want to come to this city, to want to develop in this city, to want to join us and enjoy all that Atlanta has to offer. I will be the mayor for all of Atlanta. We will be proud of our city, and for once, our politics will be as good as our people because we are a city filled with wonderful people, wonderful neighborhoods. I will protect and preserve them all so that we all prosper in the next great renaissance that is Atlanta.
Thank you, Mary. Give Mary a hand, please. Michael.
Thank you so much, Bill, for moderating this, and thank you all for being here for this important conversation. I couldn't agree more with Mayor Franklin. The most important thing that a mayor can bring is a trust that everyone knows that the mayor's intentions are that the policies and the mayor's intentions are going to follow what's in the best public interest. When I took over the City of Atlanta's Workforce Development Agency, 2 days later, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wrote an article that said a host of mayors and city council members had failed to fix the problems of this profoundly dysfunctional agency over 40 years. And he said, fix it or shut it down. A year later, we had expanded services. We had a mobile career coach that went into the toughest neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. We partnered to create multiple units of offices and had provided more jobs and opportunities in our first 9 months of 2015 than it happened in the previous 2 years at the Atlanta Workforce Development Agency. I did it with the speed of trust. I did it by using Stephen Covey's idea that if you create trust among your staff and among your community, then you can accomplish more things. I used it by saying to my staff and my colleagues that trust would be a performance multiplier. If people knew that our intentions were in the right place, they would trust us. And I agree with Mayor Franklin, the most important thing is trust. As a former federal prosecutor, I held public officials accountable for breaking the public's trust by putting them in jail when they took bribes. I held people accountable for breaking the public's trust by making sure that our federal dollars were spent in the way that they were supposed to be spent. At the age of 27, I became one of the youngest federal prosecutors in the country, and I didn't hesitate to hold public officials accountable when they broke the public trust. So you can count on the fact that when I am mayor, trust is going to be at the very forefront of everything I do, making sure that the community knows that I'm doing what's in the community's best interest and not in what some private developer's best interest.
Thank you, Michael. Please give Michael a hand. Kathy?
I want to stand up just to see if I'm taller than Michael while he's sitting. But listen, the measure of me is what I did before I got here today. When I graduated from college, I joined the Peace Corps because I thought I needed to serve my country, and I thought that was the best way for me to work for people in a really integrated way into a community. I started my career after that as a community organizer working on social justice issues, and that has been the thread of my work throughout my entire career. I ran for city council for elected office because I spent the earlier years helping people get elected to office who didn't fulfill their promises. So when I got to office, I kept that community organizing model. And what I heard from people was, we need transit, we need affordable housing, we need to control density in a way that it works for us, not works against us. And so when Ryan Gravel came forward and said, hey, I've got this idea, the Atlanta Beltline, I said, let me help you make that happen. And I devoted most of my political career holding community meetings all over this city, hearing what people wanted, getting millions of dollars in federal funding to get the project started, and solving problems that people said were barriers to get it done. It's now, probably after the airport, the second biggest economic development project the city will have ever seen, and it can be a catalyst for how we grow together. People came to me while I was on city council and said, you know what, our state doesn't have a civil rights bill. I got introduced and got passed the only comprehensive civil rights bill in the state of Georgia, including every single jurisdiction that protects people from discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations. People came to me and said, you know what, we got to worry about energy conservation and climate change, and I started the city's first sustainability program, and in the first year saved over $800,000 in taxpayer money just by auditing bills. People came to me and said, code enforcement's a mess. It's not working in our community. And I started an effective code enforcement program called the Dirty Dozen Campaign, where I got all the department heads together, and we went through case by case by case and resolved them together at the same table. I'm running for mayor now because I want to fight for ATL, affordability, transportation, and livability. That's what people have been saying that we need in the city of Atlanta. So look back in my record, see if I listen to what people have to say and get things done. And I hope that what you'll see in me now is somebody who will take ATL forward and fight for those things for our future. Thank you.
Kathy Willard. Peter.
My name is Peter Amon. I want to earn your trust and your support. I have a unique combination of experience, ethics, and leadership. In terms of experience, I was the chief operating officer for several years of the city of Atlanta. I know what it means to manage the city, to hire and fire people, to manage a budget, to manage the city to performance standards. I worked with Mayor Franklin for years, leading pro bono consulting teams, helping the city of Atlanta from 2001 through much of Mayor Franklin's terms to help the city improve in specific and measurable ways. I have the experience of having worked with some of the largest and most complex organizations in the world in the private sector and helping them do everything from deploy capital to rate their people and hold them accountable to improve customer service. So I have the experience to do this job. In terms of ethics, I bring a long track record of focusing on ethics. At my firm, I spent 7 years rebuilding our global ethics program and running it across 40 countries. As chief operating officer, I've held people accountable for ethics violations, and I had them terminated Not that I wanted to or enjoyed doing so, but they had to be held accountable for knowingly breaking the rules. In terms of leadership, I have brought together the private sector, the public sector, the nonprofit sector, and the communities and neighborhoods, whether it's helping found the Atlanta Police Foundation, helping found Partners for Home, or working on numerous other issues to advance Atlanta. I'm uniquely qualified across all of these areas to advance Atlanta, and we can do so together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Peter. Is this a good housing forum today? I just want to say that we live in a time of great cynicism, of kind of disbelief. It does not encourage people to step up and serve in a public way, certainly in public office. You know, most people suspect anybody who says they want to be mayor or commissioner, council member, or school board member. So for the folks who are willing to step up and be that leader, I think we owe them a debt of gratitude. So I want to thank all of them. And what I want to say is, Kwanzaa, you maybe said it, yes, everybody was going to be on your team. I hope one of you will be mayor on December, when's our next meeting? December the 6th. Runoff is December the 5th. So I want to encourage all of you to keep coming to the housing forum, and one of you is going to be mayor. If you just stop in that day, we would love to congratulate you for achieving that goal. I want you to consider everybody in the room on your team, because this is really hard politically, it's hard financially, it's hard to get everybody in the room and to get all the departments working in the same direction, and you're going to need a lot of help. So we're here, all of us, to help you. And each of you, I hope we can count on you to stay involved in your circle of influence, whatever that is. Only one of you is going to be mayor, but you're all leaders in this city. People often ask me how I'm doing, and my answer is, I'm overwhelmed with opportunity. And I think that's where we are as a city. We're overwhelmed with opportunity, and we're right on the cusp. And what we want and what we have a vision for is to create a city for all. That everybody's welcome, everybody can afford to be here, everybody finds a way to contribute to the community. So please thank these folks again, and thank you for coming today.